Hey, hi everybody. Welcome. So tonight we're going to continue talking about cooking on Shabbos, and we're going to talk about we're going to move on from our discussion from biblical cooking, meaning bishul cooking, deoraisa, which is cooking on a biblical level, and we're getting to some very interesting rabbinical um, violations of cooking. So we'll do our best. You could spend, what Rabbi Leibowitz told us. He said that there was someone who came out with a sefer. Just on Bishul Dirabanan, just on cooking. He's a whole sefer. You probably spend years on it, just on cooking on rabbinical level. So we're not going to do that. We're going to see what we could cover in 30 minutes. Maybe we'll do it in two classes. But certainly there's a lot to say on it. Um, okay, but the breakdown, the basic breakdown is that there are three rabbinical violations of cooking on Shabbos. They're called shehiyah. That's number one, shehiyah, which means um, leaving food on the fire as Shabbos is entering. That is called shehiyah. Um, which literally means to just like stay. Okay, that's what the word means. Then there's hatmana, which is insulating, and then the last one is aksara or chazara, which means returning food to the fire. So all these are rabbinical violations of cooking on Shabbos, and none of them are biblical, but they become very relevant for us on Shabbos in terms of how we want to and how we can heat up food in a halachically permissible manner. So we'll start first with Shahia. I mean these are rabbinical violations, but there are ways which we can, you know, combat the rabbinical decree in a way and still heat up food in a permissible manner. So we'll start with Shahia first, and then we'll do, which is again letting the food remain on the fire. Um, then we'll do Hatzmana, and which is insulating, then we'll do Aksara. So first Shahia. So again, Shahia means you have food that's on the fire as Shabbos is starting, and then yeah, so the rabbi said that might be an issue. So the Gemara in Shabbos says, there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Let's say you, let's say it's Friday, and you want something, and you want to do something which will take effect on Shabbos. So, modern day would be like a timer, right? You set up your timer on Friday, and you want the effect of your action, which is happening on Friday, to take effect on Shabbos. So Beit Shammai says that's totally not allowed, right? So according to Beit Shammai, for sure, no timers. That would seem to be obvious. Beis Hillel says it's permitted, and therefore, according to Beis Hillel, he says on a biblical level, you can take a raw piece of meat. You know, it's Friday afternoon, 4 p.m. Take a raw piece of meat, put it into your fire, put it into your oven, and have it cook. I mean, the most of the cooking is gonna be done on Shabbos, but it's fine. What did I do on Shabbos? Nothing, right? I put it in on Friday at 4 p.m. I'm totally good, and Beis Hillel says that's mutter deraisa. It's permitted on a biblical level. Good. Comes the Gemara, and the Gemara says, although that's true, but rabbinically, that's not allowed. That would actually be prohibited on Shabbos. Why? So that is what we call shahiyah, leaving food on the fire as Shabbos begins. And the rabbis, they were concerned that maybe if you leave food on the fire, food that's cooking on the fire, going into Shabbos, that you might come and literally ichate bekechalim, which means stoke the coals. So you would stoke the coals and cause the food to cook more quickly on Shabbos, and that would be a violation of cooking on Shabbos, right? Although if I just put steak in my oven right at 4 p.m., I haven't done anything wrong. But if I see the steak is, I'm getting hungry at 7 p.m., Shabbos already started, and you know it's time to eat. The guests are here. So the rabbis were worried about it. They were worried that you were going to come, you were going to stoke the coals, you were going to try to speed up the process. So that is the rabbinical decree against shahiyah. But when the question is, when does that apply? Does it apply in all situations? So there's a machlokas that the Gemara has, machlokas between Hananya and one of and the Rabbanan. So they debated on the following. They said, what if the food, let's say my steak that I put on the fire, um, let's say it's already like kind of cooked. It's kind of cooked a little bit, right? So maybe I shouldn't be worried anymore because it's already kind of cooked. And so even if I'm going to stoke the coals, that's not even going to be cooking on a maybe that's not even going to be cooking on a biblical level, or maybe I'm not even going to do it because it's already kind of cooked and we could eat it already. So are we willing to be lenient there? So Hananya says, yeah. Once it's what we call Meichel ben Drusai, which means some food that like at least somebody would eat, right? Food that, might not be cooked to your standard, but it would be cooked enough that person would eat it in a time of need. It's literally based on um a thief named Josiah that he would cook it to this level, and then he would run out of the house because he didn't want to get caught. So if it would be cooked to that amount, so Hananya says once it's cooked that amount, then rabbinically we're not worried anymore because it's cooked enough. The Rabbanan say that no, you, it needs to be it needs to be cooked to a level in order only cooked to a level where cooking it further would make it bad. So only at that point are we not concerned anymore. So if your steak was fully cooked or whatever you're making was fully cooked and cooking it only keeping it on the fire would only make it worse. So then we're not worried that you're going to come to stoke the coals, then it's going to be okay. So that's a fundamental machlokes there. But if you're so right now, you seem like it's a big problem, right? Because sometimes you want to keep food on the fire going into Shabbos. So is there a solution? So the Gemara gives you a solution. And there's gonna be more solutions as we come, so don't worry. But the first solution that the Gemara gives you is what's called garif v'katab, which means basically your fire needs to be literally means swept away, that you sweep away the coals, or like extinguish. Practically it means you need to cover your fire and also set up your fire in a way where you are not at risk of coming to raise or lower the flame. That's what it means practically. But the Rabbanan say, and Hananya seemingly agrees to this too, that even if your food is not cooked, you cannot cook to a level, complete level, or even not to a level where somebody would eat it, even if it's not cooked at all, as long as your fire is garfakatam, which we're gonna discuss practically how do you do that. So if your fire is garfakatam, then there's no issue whatsoever, and you can have your food cooking on the fire going into Shabbos. Okay, but in regards to Hanani and the Rabbanan, um, it seems like the Shulchan Aruch, meaning again, how if it becomes very practical in terms of like let's say you want to it's mostly practical when you're talking about cholent, like if someone wants to make a cholent on Shabbos, because cholent is I mean again when it comes to heating up food that has already been cooked, so it's already cooked, and most of the time, right, anytime you heat up food, most of the time it probably will get worse by you continuing to heat it up most of the time. Some things get better as they get reheated, but most of the time, if you're heating something up, then you're never gonna have to worry about this issue of shahia because it's already fully cooked. But cholent, when it comes to cholent, I mean a lot of people that go into Shabbos, your cholent is totally not cooked at all. So what do we say? So if you're Hananya, right? If we hold like Hananya, then as long as your food is like somewhat cooked and maybe somebody would eat it, so maybe if you put up your cholent at like 1 p.m., it's probably cooked. It might be cooked enough. I don't know. Maybe put on high level. Might be cooked enough by the time Shabbos starts. Also depends what time Shabbos starts. But if it's cooked to some sort of level, then it's gonna be totally fine. You won't even need to do a gar fakatam. You won't need to cover the flame, right? Or like maybe cover the knobs, right? But if according to the Rabbanon, right, your child's gonna of course keep getting better as longer it cooks. So you need to cover it. So how do we rule on that issue? So the Shulchan Aruch he quotes both. He quotes the opinion of the rabbis, the Chachamim, and he says that it needs to get to a point of mitzvah viralo, where a point where it gets worse, where the cooking gets worse. Otherwise, it's going to be prohibited unless, of course, you have gar. bekatem. But then he quotes the opinion of Chananya. He says some people hold like that. The Rama, right, Ashkenazim, right? So what do we say? So the Rama says you can be lenient. You can be lenient. The Rama gives you a kula, right? When the Rama gives you a kula, you jump for joy. The Rama gives you a kula. He says you can be lenient like the opinion of Chananya. So that would mean, right, that it would still need to be, it would still need to be at least Michael Ben Drasai, right? So so right now, as far as we know, you can't put up your challah right before Shabbos, um, unless it's gar fakatam, unless it has the covering. But if the challah was cooked enough that somebody would eat it, so then the Ramah says you can be lenient. There are those who say you should it's a big discussion in the Rishonim. How should we paskin? The Rush, he said something very interesting. He says, since Bnei Israel, since us Jews, we love Oneg Shabbos so much. We care so much about joy for Shabbos. Yeah, we're not gonna listen if you try to be machmir and try to say like the Rabbanan that it needs to be fully cooked. That's why we have to paskin like Hananya because we love Shabbos so much. We want to delight in Shabbos so much. We love the mitzvah of owning Shabbos. So he says that's why we should pass like Hananya. Okay, so there are some who say, he's not really lenient. He just thinks we can't hold it. Some say no, he really means we're lenient. Regardless, the Ramah said you could be lenient, and that seems to be the psak of uh of Ashkenazim. Um, for Sephardim, there's a discussion: can you be lenient like Hananya, Rebbe Vadia? He was Mekel. Rebbe Leibowitz told us. It seems like most people are lenient like Hananya, but it's, you know, it's it's going to make more sense as we talk about the other rabbinical violations to just do a gar fakatam on your crackpot on many stuff. So you might as well just do it. So that's 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 the first discussion when it comes to Shahia. I mean, that's the reason. That's what the rabbis were concerned about, and that's the main solution to it is to do a gar fakatam. But how do you do a gar fakatam? What is the point of a gar fakatam? Right? What does covering the fire do? So that's discussion. Um, the Baal Mor says in one place it means you got to totally move the coals to the side. Um, the Ran says the reason it works is sort of to like remind you to not move your fire up and down, right? So if you have anything which is like a reminder, that might work. The Rambam says if you cover your fire, if your fire is covered, now you're going to have like a hesach hadas. Your mind's going to be removed. You're not going to be thinking about your fire anymore, so you're not going to come to raise it. Practically, how do you do it? So it depends what you're talking about. On a blech, a blech again is like, yeah, your fire, and you put the metal sheet right directly up above the fire on the stove. So would that be considered gar fakatem, which would meaning the question would be, right, can I put it's got to be, again, if your food is already cooked, your food's already cooked and there's no issue. But if your food that's not already cooked, or let's say you're putting a cold chicken soup, right? A cold chicken soup would probably be the status of not cooked, right? On a blech. So you'd have to say, is the blech called something which is gar fakatim? So that seems to be a discussion among modern day rabbis. The Mishnah Brura implies a blech is called gar fakatim, which is good, right? Aaron Color says it's good to cover the flame, but you need to cover the flame, but you also need to cover the knobs. So he would say covering the knobs is the main point because otherwise you might come to raise or adjust them. I believe it's told us that our minhag in our yeshiva is that we're usually lenient about a blech, and we think it is called gar fakatim, right? Which would mean even if it's not fully cooked, right? You can put your cold chicken soup on it, no problem. And we are lenient to only cover the heat source, which means the blech, just covering the fire is enough. But he says, good idea to cover the flames too. Yeah, so that's basically how you do it in a crock pot. What would it mean to do gar vakatim? It would mean so some say it means you just need to put tin foil over the knob, and that's enough. Others are not happy about that, and they say you also need to take, or some say the main idea is put tin foil in between the pot the crock. I don't know what you call it. I guess the crock, right? The thing that actually heats up the fire, right? Put tinfoil there because that would be covering the flame. Um, some say it's better. Most people say it's better to do both. But if you do that, then you'll have no issues at all with making your challah in terms of shahiyah on Shabbos. What about an oven? Can you do gar for katan? Can you do that in an oven? So that's a big discussion. Rav Moshe seemed to say no. Rav Ribiat said maybe you can, in maybe there is some reason you could do it. It's important to Rav Moshe says it's important to be mindful that if you're opening an oven door on Shabbos, that itself is not such a simple thing because when you open, apparently if you open the oven door, unless it's got Shabbos mode, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a fire which lights up in the back of your oven, and that is a malacha deraisa. That's a biblical violation of lighting a fire on Shabbos. Um, okay, but there are other leniencies too, which I want to mention when it comes to shahiyah. This is a very interesting one. Um, the Shulchan Aruch writes, let's say you're cooking something which is totally raw. Right, let's go back to our chalent in the crock pot case. So Shulchan Aruch says if you're cooking something which is totally raw, then right, what was the whole reason the rabbis were worried? They were worried that maybe you were going to come to raise the flame. But if I put something in on the fire right before Shabbos, which is totally raw, so there's no chance that it's going to be ready, right? It's not going to be ready Friday night, and it will just be ready Shabbos morning. There's no incentive for me to raise the flame. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, if what you're cooking is totally raw, then you're not going to think about it at all till the next day, and there's no concern that you're going to raise the flame. Um, so that's what we call kedera chayta, which means a raw food, a raw dish, and that is permitted. Meaning you don't need a gar fakatim, you don't need to cover your flame. There's no issues there. Um, the issue maybe with that leniency is the Magen Avraham writes that you need to put it on the fire. What he writes, Samoch lechashecha mamish, meaning directly right before the evening. So many question that maybe it's not practical anymore to do that because we start Shabbos early, right? Like we start Shabbos early, and you're not going to be able to put it right before right before nightfall because you're already going to be at shul, and you're going to already have taken Shabbos for yourself. So most people are lenient. They say put it on the fire right before you accept your own Shabbos. Um, there are other questions to that this leniency. Shlomo Zalman raises the idea that maybe our instruments of cooking are so powerful that it's anything could get cooked for the Friday night meal. Um, Others raise the issue that maybe you're gonna have really long meals. You're gonna want to continue to bring out more food. Um, no, I didn't see anyone raise the issue. I was wondering, now people have like a Friday night dishes, so it might not be ready for your meal, but you know, if you're in a house with five boys, you know that eating never stops. There's no hour which people aren't eating. So maybe someone will want to eat it at 11:30 or 12:30 or 1. But I didn't see anyone who raised that. I think the simple understanding is that we're concerned about the Friday night meal. If you have crazy boys in your house who do not normal things, the rabbis weren't as concerned about crazy people. But most people say this leniency does still work. There are other leniencies too about this rabbinical decree. One is from Rav Ovadia, one's from Rav Moshe. Rav Ovadia said, the whole concept of this rabbinical concept of shahiyah is that you know, maybe you're going to come to raise the flames. He says this whole thing might not apply anymore. They used to cook on coals, and their coals would tend to die down slowly over time. Um, so you're going to see that the coals are fading, and you're going to stoke them to make them hot again. He said, "Have you ever done that in your oven? Has that ever happened to you on your stove, where you have a gas? He says we have a gas stove. The flame stays all the time. This whole thing doesn't make the maybe we should be lenient about that." He says, nevertheless, you should be machmir because This is the decree of the rabbis, but he says that's a big reason. In some cases, if you need to be lenient, it's a good reason to be lenient. Rav Moshe has similar art, meaning he says the same idea that maybe we should be lenient. The whole thing might apply, but for a different reason. He says the whole concern was that was never that I was going to bring more fire, right? It was that maybe you're going to stoke the coals of the fire, which already exists. It says our gas stoves. You didn't read about electric stoves, but see, it says our gas stoves are only raised when you add more gas. So there's no reason that the decree should apply. Nevertheless, our custom is to be stringent, but these are reasons that in certain situations, if there are other reasons to be lenient, you might be able to be lenient. There is one more. There's more, but there's one more thing I want to mention. Another way to be lenient about this idea of shehiyah. The Gemara in Shabbos says if you are what the Gemara says tach betit, which means you're going to seal the oven shut. You're going to literally seal the oven shut with cement. So then the Gemara says shehiyah, leaving food on the fire that was on the fire as Shabbos started, is permitted, and even without a gar fakatim. So the question is, why is that true? Why is it if it's completely sealed, then it should be permitted? So the Rambam writes that um, because he explains this case is that opening the sealed tight shut oven will actually ruin the food. So he says this leniency applies anytime you're going to have food which is going to be ruined by you breaking open the seal. Rashi explains differently. He says no, it's just like this super powerful reminder for you not to open the oven. So this is important. How do we paskin? Do we hold like the Rambam, which would be much more limiting, because then this would only help us if the food is going to be ruined. But if we hold like Rashi, then anytime we have this super good reminder, then we might be able to be lenient. So the Shulchan Aruch, he writes like the Rambam, and therefore this only applies when you have food which is going to be ruined. But the Rama writes, he says, no, it's going to be permitted if you are tach betit, right? If you have this super good seal, and even if food is not going to be ruined because of it. So that's a leniency for Ashkenazim as well. What do we say in modern day tach betit is? So, right, if we think gar fakatim is putting tinfoil over the fire, then tach betit would need to be something which is even stronger and removes access to the fire. So the Chazon Ish said maybe if you put a lock on your oven, that could be called tach betit. The Orchos Shabbos quotes Shevet Alevi and says, let's say you had a hot plate, or an adjustable hot plate. He says maybe covering the knobs is a gar fakatim, but removing the knobs would be tach betit. Or some say taping very, very strongly is called tach betit. Okay, so that's irrelevant. Those are relevant things when it comes to whatever appliances you have in your house. Then you should double check before, or just ask when you come to that issue. Let's do the second one. I'm not going to say so much about this second rabbinical decree. So we should be able to cover that. And then maybe next week we'll finish up. So the second one is called hatmana, which means insulating. That the rabbis decreed you cannot insulate your food on Shabbos. So the Gemara says there are two types of insulating. And insulating even on Friday going into Shabbos is going to be a problem if it's something which causes causes more hevel, more steam. And then there's insulating on Shabbos itself, which is also going to be an issue. The reason why I'm not going to spend so much time on it is because there are a lot of leniencies when it comes to insulating. And the first one is a machlok actually between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. So if you're Shulchan Aruch and if you're Sephardi and you follow the Shulchan Aruch, you might need to spend more time talking about these issues. But the Shulchan Aruch says that if you have insulating at all, meaning he defines insulating as even when it's sitting on just touching the coals, which doesn't sound like insulating to me, but he says that's insulating. Meaning your pot is sitting on coals, he says that's insulating, and that potentially could be an issue on Shabbos. The Ramah says, and this is a big one, a very big one. He says, if your pot, right, if let's say you have a pot and you want to wrap it up, insulate it. He says if it's at all exposed to any part of the upper pot, that is not called insulating, which would mean in order to have insulating on Shabbos, if you're an Ashkenazi at least, it needs to be totally insulated, which would, give you a big leniency. Is, as long as you don't fully wrap up whatever you want to wrap up, you should be okay. And the Chayei Adam writes it needs to be covered up and down and all around. So it was like a crock pot, for example. Is that called insulating? So some say, yeah, maybe it is called insulating, but for Schechter, and many others, they think no, crock pots they're sticking out of the top just because there's a lid. It's not meaning you have the crock and then you have the pot in the top. So he says that the pot has enough above the crock where it's not fully called insulating, so there's no issue of Hatzmana on Shabbos. Some if you ever go to people and you see, they take out their pot and you're like, why are there little balls of tinfoil underneath your pot? So it's because some people are worried about this issue of insulating, so they say it's a good idea to put tinfoil balls at the bottom. Rav Schechter thought it was not necessary. And then just a few other leniencies which make insulating just not as big of an issue on Shabbos. Many Achronim point out that that the pot itself is not called something which is insulating, meaning putting food into a pot on its own is not insulating. There needs to be something surrounding the pot, an additional layer outside the pot to be called insulating. So that would mean you know just putting, I mean, that would take care of a lot of things. That's why putting food into your pot is not insulating. There's no outer layer around the pot, so that's not called insulating. That's just called putting food into a pot. Another big one is, the Shulchan Aruch writes, that if the purpose of you wrapping something up is not to maintain the heat, then that's not called insulating. So, for example, you ever seen people, they take their challah and they wrap it up in tinfoil on Shabbos. So maybe you'll start yelling at them and say, "Hey, you can't do that. That's called hatzmana. That's insulating on Shabbos. So don't do that. Don't yell at them, because first of all, just don't do that. And second of all, because it's probably mutter, because when you wrap your challah in tinfoil, so your purpose isn't for the heat. You might be happy that it's getting a little bit hotter, but that's not why you're doing it. You don't want the crumbs to go everywhere. You don't want the challah to dry out, right? You don't want something to drip on it. So it's you're wrapping it up for a different issue, right? The Shulchan Aruch is talking about protecting it from mice. So that's why he says if you wrap something up to protect it from mice, that's not called hatmana. That's just called wrapping something up because you want to wrap it up. And Rav Moshe writes similarly, you're allowed to cover a pot even though you're happy that it's retaining heat from the pot, because your purpose isn't for covering. Your purpose for putting the lid on the pot is not the heat. You want to protect it from other things. A third one. This is another big one. So is that it's only called insulating when the pot is actually physically connected to the thing which is insulating. Meaning, like, let's say meaning that would be you take a pot and you wrap a towel around your pot. Okay, so that might be called insulating if you completely wrap it around. But let's say you put something into say you take a tin, 9 by 13, and you put that into a warming jar on Shabbos, and you completely cover up, with tinfoil, right? And then you put into a warming jar on Shabbos. So is that called insulating? So you might think, yeah, that's called insulating. It's totally surrounded by the fire. How could people do that on Shabbos? So the Ran and the Rashba, and it's quoted by the Shulchan Aruch, they write, no, it's not an issue as long as the thing which is insulating is directly covering it. So unless your warming jar is totally stuffed, right, completely stuffed where there's no space, you're not going to have complete insulation around your tin inside the warming jar. I mean, if you're a Sephardi, you might say that that there is, right? As far as say even a little bit of installation might be an issue. So that might be a discussion. But if you're an Ashkenazi, it's not totally surrounding it. Yeah, so that I think let's stop there. There are obviously more issues about Shahia and about Hatmana. These are the basics, but I think these keep learning and keep learning more. There are many questions.